Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. Thank you for your support. Today I'm going to kind of do a semi-book review, but for bibliomancy purposes, because I wanted to start integrating this in some of our bibliomancy readings, but I wanted to read you the preface of this book just as an introduction, so to speak. It's a book by Noah Levine. It's called Dharma Punx. He does have a YouTube channel called Against the Stream Meditation. I think it's based on his second book, which I need to read. This is a book I picked up actually from the local library about 20 years ago, roughly. And it chronicles, the transition, the transformation, the spiritual transformation of a way old school hardcore punk rocker from Northern California, a scene I'm very familiar with. So, of course, it appealed to me, along with some of the spiritual practices I've picked up since I was 12 years old, and even before that, just being exposed to a variety of cultures, and being agnostic myself has been very interesting through this process since awakening. So, I'm glad I dug this book back out. I think I'm going to have to read it all the way through, but I'd rather share it with you guys first. So, I'll go ahead and I'll just read you the preface really quick so you get a backstory, you get a little premise. Now, keep in mind, it may be a little triggering. Nothing hits the editing room floor with punk rockers. And a lot of things tend to be very intentionally hypocritical and sarcastic to showcase mankind's fallibility. So, let's read the preface here. Dharma Punx is my story. And it's a story about my generation, the punks, the kids all around the world who searched for meaning and liberation in the age of Reagan, Thatcher, and the Cold War's constant threat of total nuclear annihilation. Something we're doing another round of these days. All right. I sought a different path than that of my parents. I totally rejected meditation and all the spiritual shit they built their lives on. Looking at the once idealistic hippie generation who had long since cut their hair, left the commune, and bought into the system, we saw that peace and love had failed to make any real changes in the world. In response, we felt despair and hopelessness, out of which came the punk rock movement. Seeking to rebel against our parents' pacifism and society's fascist system of oppression and capitalist-driven propaganda, we responded in our own way, different from those before us, creating a new revolution for a new generation. Painfully aware of the corruption in the government and inconsistencies in the power dynamics in our homes, we rebelled against our families and society in one loud and fast roar of teen angst. Unwilling to accept the dictates of the system, we did whatever we could to rebel. We wanted freedom, and we were willing to fight for it. The situation was compounded by the personal despair that I and so many of my generation were facing. Broken homes, addicted parents, useless school teachers, and a total lack of elders to look up to. Most of our parents were too busy to pay attention to us as they tried to survive the aftermath of the 60s or succeed in the race for riches in the 70s and 80s. In my case, my mother was battling with addiction and 2 broken marriages, doing her best to raise 4 children. My father was so dedicated to spiritual practice and service that at times it kept him from being as available to me as I probably needed. So I and countless others hit the streets, fueled by the music of revolution, anger, angst, fear, despair, hatred, and a total dissatisfaction with the status quo. We dyed our hair or shaved our heads. We donned a new uniform to set us apart from the mindless masses of adults and brain-dead herds of kids who were going along with the lies, buying into the great American fallacy, playing sports, going to school, and listening to the awful popular music of the 80s that carried no meaningful messages. It was just another symptom of the disease of apathy and materialism that plagues our society. Drugs and booze seemed to be the only effective escape from the feelings of hopelessness and despair. Many of us went directly to narcotics as teenagers, eating acid like it was candy, and chasing speed with cheap vodka, smoking truckloads of weed, consuming gallons of cheap beer, on a vain attempt to get numb and stay numb. We embraced a nihilistic outlook of life. Set apart from mainstream society, we were a constant target of violence and ridicule. Fighting to survive, fighting for our views and the right to be different, we often found ourselves involved in some battle or another. If it wasn't with the cops, it was with the jocks or hicks or each other. Our lives of violence and drugs led to many early deaths, overdoses, murders, car accidents, and countless suicides. Death and grief had been a central part of our lives of all the kids who were associated with the early punk rock scene. Following the examples set by Sid Vicious and Darby Crash, our goal was to live fast, do lots of drugs, and fuck the system by dying young. Half of the kids from the crew of punks I hung out with in the 80s are dead. This book is about those of us who didn't die young and are still around. Those of us who don't go around talking about punk as just a phase we went through as kids. Dharma Punx is about those of us who, motivated by the same dissatisfaction with life that brought us to the punk rock scene, now have turned towards spiritual practice as a nonviolent form of revolution. It is a true story about finding in meditation and service the freedom I was seeking as a young, idealistic punk rocker. Having clearly seen the uselessness of drugs and violence, I and others have found positive ways to channel our rebellion against the lies of society. Still fueled by anger at an injustice and suffering, we now use that energy to awaken our own natural wisdom and compassion, instead of for self-destruction. This is a story about those of us who have taken ourselves and our struggles off the streets. We now fight the inner battle against delusions and ignorance, yet we continue to express ourselves outwardly in our own unique punk rock ways. Having put down the booze and drugs, having let go of the violence and hatred, having lost too many friends to prison and death, we have found the highest spiritual truth, the Dharma. The spiritual path that was described by the Buddha as being against the stream, against man's selfish desires and ignorance. This fits in perfectly with the punk rock ethic. We've turned the outer rebellion into an inner revolution. Spiritual truth comes in many different forms, and through many different spiritual traditions. While I find myself primarily engaged in Buddhist practice, some of the other Dharma Punx have dedicated themselves to the Sufi path of Islamic mysticism, to a personal relationship with Christ, or to the Hindu path of devotion and service. I use the term Dharma to mean the truth with a capital T. And as my father often reminds me, that which is true is found in all spiritual and religious traditions. No one has the corner on the truth. This book will take you on an intense journey from the streets to juvenile hall, and from juvenile hall to the meditation hall. It follows the life of a confused kid and a search for clarity. It is the story of not just one life, but of the lives of several people who have come together to form our crew, the Dharma Punx. A group of men and women who are deeply committed to spiritual practice and engaged service to the world. These are the new faces of the punk rock scene, a group of committed Dharma practitioners who you can still find down at the local clubs singing along to their favorite bands and doing the occasional stage dive. This is not a fictional tale of romantic suffering or a Hollywood love story. It's about real people, real loss, and general spiritual growth. This is a story of transformation that of a part of a generation often touted as X, who now find meaning and purpose in spiritual practice and service. It is a full circle, from being institutionalized to teaching meditation in institutions, from robbing and stealing to giving and forgiving. It's a story about finding freedom and then spending the rest of our lives giving it away. There you go, guys. I would read the acknowledgments in true punk rock fashion, as it does kind of read exactly like every backside of every jacket thinking every Tom, Dick, and Harry. Punk rockers are good at gratitude, surprisingly enough. Almost every vinyl record, every album, you'll see it on the backside or in the jacket and on the inside of a vinyl record. So, with that said, I look forward to seeing what Spirit wants us to hear from this book as we move forward with some bibliomancy. There you go, guys. Enjoy.